Hello, my friends, and welcome back to The Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. Love her, love this book. And we find ourselves on Chapter 7, page 37. Chapter 7 is A Mouse in Love. And what was our own favorite member of the mouse community doing while the sound of the Mouse Council drum echoed through the walls of the castle? Reader, I must report that Furlough had not seen the worst of it. Despereaux sat with the princess and the king and listened to song after song. At one point, gently, oh so gently, the pea picked up the mouse in her hand. She cupped him in her palm and scratched his oversized ears. "You have lovely ears," the pea said to him. "They are like small pieces of velvet." Despereaux thought that he might faint with the pleasure of someone referring to his ears as small and lovely. He laid his tail against Pea's wrist to steady himself, and he felt the princess's pulse, the pounding of her heart, and his own heart immediately took up the rhythm of hers. "Papa," she said when the music was over, "I'm going to keep this mouse. We are going to be great friends." The king looked at Despereaux cupped in his daughter's hands. He narrowed his eyes. "A mouse," he muttered. "A rodent." "What?" said the pea. "Put it down," the king commanded. "No," said the pea, who was a person not at all used to being told what to do. "I mean, why should I?" "Because I told you to." "But why?" protested the pea. "Because it's a mouse." "I know. I'm the one who told you he was a mouse." "I wasn't thinking," said the king. "Thinking of what?" "Your mother, the queen." "My mother," said the pea sadly. "Mice are rodents," said the king. He adjusted his crown. "They are related to rats. You know how we feel about rats. You know of our own dark history with rats." The pea shuddered. "But Papa," she said, "he's not a rat. Well, he's a mouse. There's a difference." "Royalty," the king said, "has many responsibilities, and one of them is not becoming involved personally with even the distant relatives of one's enemies. Put him down, Pea." The princess put Despereaux down. "Good girl," said the king, and then he looked at Despereaux. "Scat," he said. Despereaux, however, did not scat. He sat up and stared at the princess. The king stamped his foot. "Scat!" he shouted. "Papa," said the princess, "please don't be mean to him." And she began to weep. Despereaux, seeing her tears, broke the last of the great ancient rules of mice. He spoke to a human. "Please," said Despereaux, "don't cry." He held out his handkerchief to the princess. The pea sniffed and leaned down close to him. "Do not speak to her!" thundered the king. Despereaux dropped his handkerchief. He backed away from the king. "Rodents do not speak to princesses. We will not have this becoming a topsy-turvy, wrong-headed world. There are rules. Scat! Get lost before my common sense returns and I have you killed." The king stamped his foot again. "Sorry," the lights went off. Let's see if it'll adjust. There we go. "There would be rules. Scat! Get lost before I have you killed." The king stamped his foot again. Despereaux found it alarming to have such a big foot brought down with so much force and anger so close to his own small head. He ran towards the hole in the wall. But he turned before he entered it. He turned and shouted to the princess. "My name is Despereaux." "Despereaux?" she said. I honor you," shouted Despereaux. "I honor you" was what the knight had said to the fair maiden in the story that Despereaux had read every day in the book in the library. Despereaux had muttered the phrase often to himself, but he had never before this evening had occasion to use it when speaking to someone else. "Get out of here!" shouted the king, stamping his foot harder and then harder still, so it seemed as if the whole castle, the very world, were shaking. Rodents know nothing of honor. Despereaux ran into the hole, and from there he looked out at the princess. He had picked up his handkerchief, she had picked up his handkerchief, and she was looking at him, right directly into his soul. Despereaux, she said. He saw his name on her lips. I honor you, whispered Despereaux. I honor you. He put his paw over his heart. He bowed so low that his whiskers touched the floor. He was, alas, a mouse deeply in love. Chapter 8. To the Rats. The Mouse Council, 13 honored mice and 1 most very honored head mouse, heeded the call of Leicester's drum and gathered in a small secret hole off of King Philip's throne room. The 14 mice sat around a piece of wood balanced on spools of thread and listened in horror while Despereaux's father related the story of what Furlough had seen. At the foot of the king, said Leicester. Her finger right on top of his head, said Leicester. He was looking up at her, and it was not in fear. The Mouse Council members listened with their mouths open. They listened with their whiskers drooping and their ears flat against their heads. They listened in dismay and outrage and fear. When Leicester finished, there was a silence, dismal and deep. Something, intoned the most very honored head mouse, is wrong with your son. He is not well. This goes beyond his fevers, beyond his large ears and lack of growth. He is deeply disturbed. His behavior endangers us all. Humans cannot be trusted. We know this to be an undisputable fact. A mouse who consorts with humans, a mouse who would sit right at the foot of a man, a mouse who would allow a human to touch him. And here, the entire Mouse Council indulged in a collective shiver of disgust. Ugh! Cannot be trusted. That is the way of the world, our world. Fellow mice, it is my most fervent hope that Despereaux has not spoken to these humans. But obviously we can assume nothing, and this is a time to act, not wonder. Leicester nodded his head in agreement, and the 12 other members of the Mouse Council nodded their heads too. We have no choice, said the head mouse. He must go to the dungeon. He pounded his fisted paw on the table. He must go to the rats, immediately. Members of the council, I will now ask you to vote. Those in favor of Despereaux being sent to the dungeon, say aye. There was a chorus of sad ayes. Those opposed, say nay. Silence reigned in the room. The only noise came from Leicester. He was crying, and 13 mice, ashamed for Leicester, looked away. Reader, can you imagine your own father not voting against you, your being sent to the dungeon full of rats? Can you imagine him not saying one word in your defense? Despereaux's father wept, and the most very honored head mouse beat his paw against the table again and said, Despereaux telling will appear before the mouse community. He will hear of his sins. He will be given a chance to deny them. If he does not deny them, he will be allowed to renounce them so that he may go to the dungeon with a pure heart. Despereaux Tilling is hereby called to sit with the Mouse Council. At least Leicester had the decency to weep at his act of perfidy. Reader, do you know what perfidy means? I have a feeling you do, based on the little scene that is just unfolded here. But you should look up the word in your dictionary, just to be sure. Chapter 9. The Right Question. The Mouse Council sent Furlough to collect Despereaux, and Furlough found his brother in the library, standing on top of a great open book, his tail wrapped tightly around his feet, his small body shivering. Despereaux was reading the story out loud to himself. He was reading it from the beginning so that he could get to the end where the reader was assured that the knight and the fair maiden lived happily ever after. Despereaux wanted to read those words, happily ever after. He needed to say them aloud. He needed some assurance that this feeling he had for the Princess P, this love, would come to a good end. And so he was reading the story as if it were a spell, and the words of it, spoken aloud, could make magic happen. "See here," said Furlough, out loud to himself. He looked at his brother and then looked away. This is just the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing. What is he doing here, for cripe's sakes? He's not eating the paper. He's talking to the paper. Oh, it's wrong, wrong, wrong. "Hey," he said to Despereaux. Despereaux kept reading. "Hey!" shouted Furlough. "Despereaux! The Mouse Council wants to see you." "Pardon?" said Despereaux. He looked up from the book. "The Mouse Council has called you to sit with them." "Me?" said Despereaux. "You." I'm busy right now," said Despereaux, and he bent his head again to the open book. Furlough sighed. "Geez," he said. "Cripes! Nothing makes sense to this guy. Nothing. I was right to turn him in. He's sick." Furlough crawled up the chair leg and then hopped onto the book. He sat next to Despereaux. He tapped him on the head once, twice. "Hey," he said. "Mouse Council isn't asking. They're telling. They're commanding. You have to come with me. Right now." Despereaux turned to Furlough. "Do you know what love is?" he said. "Huh?" "Love." Furlough shook his head. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "The question you should be asking is why the Mouse Council wants to see you." "There's somebody who loves me," said Despereaux, "and I love her. And that's the only thing that matters to me." "Somebody who loves you? Somebody who you love? What difference does that make? What matters is that you're in a lot of trouble with the Mouse Council." "Her name," said Despereaux, "is P." "What?" "The person who loves me, her name is P." "Cripes," said Furlough. "You're missing the whole point of everything here. You're missing the point of being a mouse. You're missing the point of being called to sit with the Mouse Council. You gotta come with me. It's the law. You've been called." Despereaux sighed. He reached out and touched the words "fair maiden" in the book. He traced them with one paw, and then he put the paw to his mouth. "Cripes," said Furlough. "You're making a fool of yourself. Let's go." "I honor you," whispered Despereaux. "I honor you." And then, reader, he followed Furlough over the book and down the chair leg and across the library floor to the waiting Mouse Council. He allowed his brother to lead him to his fate. I wonder what that fate is. Do you have time for one more chapter? How about chapter 10? Good reasons. The entire mouse community, as instructed by the most very honored head mouse, had gathered behind the wall of the castle ballroom. The members of the Mouse Council sat atop 3 bricks piled high, and spread out before them was every mouse, old and young, foolish and wise, who lived in the castle. They were all waiting for Despereaux. "Make way," said Furlough. "Here he is. I've got him. Make way." Furlough pushed through the crowd of mice. Despereaux clung to his brother's tail. "There he is," the mice whispered. "There he is. Oh, he's so small. Well, they say that he was born with his eyes open." Some of the mice pulled away from Despereaux in disgust, and others, thrill-seekers, reached out to touch him with a whisker or a paw. "The princess put a finger on him. Well, they say that he was sitting at the foot of the king." Well, it just simply is not done, came the distinctive voice of Despereaux's Aunt Florence. Make way, shouted Furlow. I have him right here. I have Despereaux Tilling, who has been called to sit with the Mouse Council. He led Despereaux to the front of the room. Honored members of the Mouse Council, shouted Furlow, I have brought you Despereaux Tilling, as you have requested, to sit with you. He looked over his shoulder at Despereaux. Ugh, let go of me, Furlow said. My friends, it feels to me as though Furlow is feeling a lot of self-importance right now. I get the sense that Furlow really likes this important job that he's been given, at the cost of his relationship with his brother. That makes me sad. Makes me sad for Furlow, for compromising himself like that. Makes me especially sad for Despereaux, who seems to have nobody on his side. Despereaux dropped Furlow's tail. He looked up at the members of the Mouse Council. His father met his gaze and then looked away, shook his head and looked away. Despereaux turned and faced the sea of mice. To the dungeon! A voice cried out. Straight to the dungeon with him! Despereaux's head, which had been full of such delightful phrases as happily ever after and lovely ears and I honor you, suddenly cleared. Straight to the dungeon! Another voice shouted. Enough! Said the most very honored head mouse. This trial will be conducted in an orderly fashion. We will act civilized. He cleared his throat. He said to Despereaux, Son, turn and look at me. Despereaux turned. He looked up and into the head mouse's eyes. Those were dark eyes, deep and sad and frightened. I want you to ask yourself now, is the author saying dark eyes? When she says dark eyes, does she mean it literally, figuratively, or can it be both? Can a word be both literal and figurative? Think about what you know about little mice eyes. Lots of them are, in fact, literally black eyes, dark eyes. But then she also uses the word dark to describe a feeling that she gets from these eyes. Said they were deep and sad and frightened. So that leads me to believe that they are both literally dark eyes, black eyes, and figuratively dark eyes, since they are filled with sadness and fear. Interesting. And looking into them, Despereaux's heart thudded once, twice. Despereaux Tilling, said the head mouse. Yes, sir, said Despereaux. We, the 14 members of the Mouse Council, have discussed your behavior. First, we will give you a chance to defend yourself against these rumors of your egregious acts. Did you or did you not sit at the foot of a human king? I did, said Despereaux. But I was listening to music, sir. I was there to hear the song that the king was singing. To hear the what? The song, sir. He was singing a song about the deep purple falling over sleepy garden walls. That's personification. The head mouse shook his head. Whatever you are talking about is beside the point. The question is this and only this. Did you sit at the foot of the human king? I did, sir. The community of mice shifted their tails and paws and whiskers. They waited. And did you allow the girl human, the princess, to touch you? Her name is P. Never mind her name. Did you allow her to touch you? Yes, sir, said Despereaux. I let her touch me. It felt good. A gasp arose from the assembled mice. Despereaux heard his mother's voice. Oh, mon Dieu! It is not the end of the world. It was a touch. What of it? It is simply not done, came Aunt Florence's voice from the crowd. To the dungeon, said a mouse in the front row. Silence! Roared the most very honored head mouse. Silence! He looked down at Despereaux.
Do you, Despereaux Tilling, understand the sacred, never-to-be-broken rules of conduct for being a mouse?"
"Yes, sir," said Despereaux. I guess so, but—"
"Did you break them?"
"Yes, sir," said Despereaux. He raised his voice. But I broke the rules for good reason. Because of music. And because of love."
"Love!" said the head mouse. "Oh, cripes," said Furlough. "Here we go."
"I love her, sir," said Despereaux.
"We are not here to talk about love. This trial is not about love. This trial is about you being a mouse," shouted the most very honored head mouse from high atop the bricks, "and not acting like one."
"Yes, sir," said Despereaux. "I know."
"No, I do not think you know. And because you do not deny these charges, you must be punished. You are to be sent, as ancient castle mouse law decrees, to the dungeon. You are being sent to the rats."
"That's right," shouted a mouse in the crowd. "That's the ticket." The dungeon. The rats. Despereaux's small heart sank all the way to the tip of his tail. There would be no light in the dungeon. No stained glass windows. No library. And no books. There would be no Princess P.
"But first," said the most very honored head mouse, "we will give you the chance to renounce your actions. We will allow you to go to the dungeon with a pure heart."
"Renounce?"
"Repent! Say that you are very sorry and that you sat at the foot of the human king. Say that you are sorry that you allowed the human princess to touch you. Say that you regret these actions."
Despereaux felt hot, and then cold, and then hot again. Renounce her? Renounce the princess?
"Oh, mon Dieu!" shouted his mother. "Son, do not act the fool. Renounce! Repent!" "What say you, Despereaux Tilling?"
I say, no," whispered Despereaux.
"What?"
said the head mouse. "No," said Despereaux, and this time he did not whisper the word. "I am not sorry. I will not renounce my actions. I love her. I love the princess." There was a bellow of collective outrage. The whole of the mouse community surged towards Despereaux. The mice seemed to become one angry body with hundreds of tails and thousands of whiskers, and one huge hungry mouth opening and closing, saying over and over and over again, "To the dungeon, to the dungeon, to the dungeon." The words pounded through Despereaux's body with each beat of his heart. "Very well," said the most very honored head mouse. "You will die then with a black heart. Threadmaster," he called, "bring out the thread." Despereaux marveled at his own bravery. He admired his own defiance. And then, reader, he fainted. I want you to think about both literal and figurative light and dark and how they're playing out in this book. The author said that Despereaux is going, or the head mouse had said that Despereaux will die with a black heart. Is that literal or figurative darkness? Will he die with literally a black heart? A heart that is the color black? Or does that mean something different? I want to hear about that. Put that in your writer's notebook. And to the rest of you, have a lovely afternoon.